Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavai Tejasvinavaditamastu Ma Vivisha Vahai. Om. May He protect us both. May He nourish us both. May we work together with great energy. May our study be vigorous. May we like each other. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. As some of you may know, we are reveling in some of the collected wisdom of one of the 5 direct disciples of Sri Ramakrishna that came to the United States. Vivekananda being the big splash at the Parliament of World's Religions in 1893, when almost as a young boy, I mean a younger man, compared to the graybeards of all the descriptions of the different denominations of the world, he came at the end and spoke from the heart. What they did not know in advance was that this young boy from India, this young man from India, would be speaking from the heart of God, would be speaking from the wisdom that would display that he himself had swum the ocean of God, become one with the ocean of God, and found out that he always was. Sisters and brothers of America still resound throughout this land and throughout the world as what we feel is this a little provincial in the Vedanta society was the birth of the interfaith movement today, the movement of interfaith harmony. So Abhedananda came over and stayed for 20 years, 25 years, at Vivekananda's request. And he did something that I think is just grand. And I have to tell you, my friends, that we took it for granted in the generation that succeeded Vivekananda and Abhedananda. He became one with us. He spoke our language, the language of the heart. He engaged himself in the discussions of the day, foremost of among which were things like evolution and women's rights. 1920, he was delivering these wonderful lectures. And as I like to say in a little memory, a little provincial, my older sister was born in 1920, August 10th, and within perhaps 16 days, my mother was, I won't say she won the right, she had that right. She was honored respectfully, was bestowing and giving and acknowledging the right, as every human being has the right to stand free, to vote. So he became one with us almost in idiom, and yet he brought something from India of immense value, an immense worth, a treasure pearl, as they say, of great price, but it was a treasure chest of the Indian understanding, the understanding of the spirituality of the East, that in addition to the 3 states of consciousness which the Westerners studied, dreaming, dreamless sleep, and the waking state, our psychologists and so on, that there's another state, everybody, called the superconscious state, shining down and into these other states of mind which have come to be seen by the Indian sages, women and men since immemorial time, to be mere, as we call them, phantasmagorias, will-o'-the-wisp, which is swamp lights that go off into the woods. You don't want to follow into the woods. There might be water in those trees at night. But that compared with the reality, the oneness, the living oneness with the wisdom, the being, and the joy of God, infinite, shining, become mere shadows, mere dreams, mere mirages, and mistakes of the ultimate reality. And what is the biggest and grandest mistake of all? The firstborn of ignorance? Hey, you got it. It's ego. The ultimate unreality upon which we seem to stake our claim almost the moment we're born. Well, 4 years old. Of the separateness of the human spirit from God. And I ask you, what is a greater metaphor of that than the departure from Eden? So now, in this wonderful peroration of his talking about many of these things, including the nature of mind and the different functions of mind, sense gathering and then interpretation, and the intelligent will coming in and discerning and going back as a spiral, back and back and back to the very center and essence of our being, which the Indians call the Atman. That is to say, God immanent, infinity immanent within our hearts and souls, where, when we experience inside, we experience joy, love and joy. Love and joy be with you, and with you your wassail too. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, I drink no ordinary wine, and be of good cheer. So now he's talking, after all this, back to the days of the divine, the divinity coming like the dawn, the divine sun upon the horizon of the individual soul. Then he said, remember, then in that light of the divine, that capital S, sun, darkness of night is dispelled, and darkness which enveloped the real nature of things and made it invisible to mortal beings, and that darkness of night which is dispelled, which enveloped the real nature of things and made it invisible to mortal beings, is vanished. So he says, now the question arises, because we're talking about steps. Imagine. Are you with me? Let's go along. So, ain't got a barrel of money, walking along, singing that song. We say, God with us, side by side with God. So now the question arises, how can this realization, or nirvana, be attained? What are the steps for the attainment of this superconscious state? In answering the first question, Vedanta says that realization, or nirvana, can be attained in perfect silence. Some of the wonderful mystical phrases in the Bible, the scriptures of the Hebrews, the New Testament so-called, of their little semi-heretical offspring, Christians. One of the greatest is, be still and know that I am God. So perfect silence, of course, is going to be meditation, isn't it? It may sound strange to our ears, but it is the most difficult thing to accomplish. It is not merely external silence, but it is the silence of the mind. It is the inner tranquil mood in which our mind is not disturbed by passions like anger, hatred, jealousy, envy, or attachment to material things. anger, hatred, jealousy, envy, or attachment to material things. And that's everything we say in the outside world. In that state of inward calm and serenity, he says, the perfect realization of God dawns upon us. Eckhart, the great German Christian mystic, said there must be perfect stillness in the soul before God can whisper his word into it, before the light of God can shine into the soul and transform the soul into God. The awakening of the soul, he says, is the first step in the path of realization. I would say the awakening of the wonder and the sense of being of the all in the earliest phases of entering that deep submersion, that deep world, deeper than the subconscious, which is to the superconscious in meditation. So it says the soul must be awakened from the sleep of self-delusion. We are now sleeping. The sleep of self-delusion. We must wake up and see things as they are in reality and not as they appear to be. And my friends, that distinguishing between the real and the apparent, that is to say, the dissolving of the mist of ignorance, of the fog of ignorance, of the myth, of the apparent reality of the world and the distinction of human beings. We may talk about that a little tonight. And the ultimate myth, mistake, myth. A myth is as good as a mile, that we are an ego. So, he says, and that incidentally is the role of the jnani within us, to distinguish between the real and the apparent. This awakening of the soul in Sanskrit is called pratibha, the first step in the path of realization. When the soul is awakened, it begins to see how far the animal nature leads us and what is the next step, where we are going, what we are doing, what all this means. These are very full phrases, are they not? Fulsome. Feel like the Wells Fargo coach has just arrived tonight and it's unloading all the goods, the treasure, the fine clothes from the east, from North Dakota, wherever it's from, and all of these goods and things for the stocking the grocery store of our lives of real spiritual nutrition. And yes, the treasure chest of the wisdom and knowledge, meaning first-hand direct experience of God, which, as we understand, is the experience of love and light. And then he says, the soul tries to live. Then the soul tries to live a moral, spiritual, and righteous life. It tries to correct its errors and purify its inner nature. Now, this is an interesting thing about ethics, you know, but it's pretty clear that ethics is related to the ultimate spiritual experience somewhat as means are to an end. They are not the end in themselves. And that's where we get all of this glasses on the nose, prissy behavior, and overemphasis, if I may say so, among us in the West, on the ethical steps. Yes, they're requirements, but they're not the end of it. They are stepping stones to the ultimate realization of our oneness with God, which can be in our hearts as a yearning and a prescience as soon as we begin to understand that one secret, that there can be one shining infinity, one only one. And the conviction, the persuasion, the inner feeling of assent. Yes, that feels right to me. The beginning of our journey. And remember, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. The purification of the heart or mind, this is a new paragraph. It's called Chitta Suddhi, S-U-D-D-H-I, Chitta Suddhi, is the next step. It is the step of the neophyte. Kind of good to dwell on these things, perhaps put them in a place where we can remember, because they're universal, they're showing us that we're on the path. The awakened soul becomes a neophyte when he purifies. It has a comma here, his heart. Usually commas are not used in the grammar of the English language to emphasize stage notes, the sound of English. Here it's perfectly appropriate. When he becomes a neophyte. Let's just see those words again because they're so beautiful. So the second step is to become this neophyte who is now trying to take the next step, which is the purification of the heart or mind. The awakened soul becomes a neophyte when he purifies, his heart. The purification of the heart or mind is possible when we have controlled our animal propensities, when we keep them down, rise above them and conquer them, when we realize, this is almost the first step, the second step, when we realize, oh no, chasing the wind, chasing the mirage, chasing the will-o'-the-wisp will never lead to happiness. And the commonplace view of where to find that blessed thing in our sacred scriptures, the Declaration of Independence, the pursuit of happiness, does not lie outside, does not lie in the bottle of beer or the gallon of beer all night and the headache in the morning. This is the big awakening. And it comes in the trail and reinforcing when we realize that what we want to do is bring our hearts and minds inward to the path of the infinite, the mountain of God. And when we want to control our animal propensities and all the mirage of the world that it sets up for us outside, it's a lie. It's a lie. And surely we do not want our lives to be living a lie. When the reality of our souls and that of every other human and every other creature, for that matter, plant, animal, or kingdom, realm of the environment, is the shining reality of infinity. When we've controlled, and we control this outward concept of the lie, when we want to keep them down, these animal propensities, rise above them and conquer them, this is when you really become a religious aspirant. 4 things are absolutely necessary to attain to the purification of the heart or mind, which, yes, is part of the means to the end. And the great Swamis, our wonderful Swami Satya Mohanananda, is going to give a lecture, I believe, this coming Sunday, the day after tomorrow, November 1st. Daylight saving, everybody, is over. And now we get our hour back, so we revel in that extra hour. His whole lecture is going to be about this relationship of the means to the end. And the means are the same as the end. Stepping stones of reality higher and higher to the ultimate vision of infinity. All right? 4 things are absolutely necessary to attain to the purification of the heart or mind, the journey we're on. The practice of self-control, which means the control of the mind, which must be brought under control. You are the ruler of the mind. Mind is not your ruler, but you've allowed it to become your ruler and to enslave you. You must turn the tide and make it stay where it belongs, in God. You are the master, and even yearning for God, the means is the end. You must turn the tide and make it stay where it belongs. You are the master, but you've lost your mastery over your mind and senses. And I'll kind of skip along here because we like to reinforce these words. Self-control is the first thing. Then comes the practice of truthfulness. Oh boy. Because the eternal truth cannot be attained by falsehood. We must be true to ourselves first. Our real selves. I love the image. We kind of unveiled it a few nights ago here. The truth is the eyeglasses that you put on to see reality with a capital R. And that's why Jesus said, and you shall know the truth. I mean, he did. You shall know the truth, capital T, and the truth shall make you free. So if we get it intellectually in our mind that we are not the body, we are not the mind, we are not certainly any of these objects of the world, do you realize that we think of that chair that I'm looking at now, the wonderful upholstery as being solid, and the upholstery is part of it, and the touch of it and the color, all of that stuff is in the back of our heads. It's a show. My Lord, the very universe is a sound and light show. You look up at night, we have no idea what we're seeing. The brightest star in the sky is Sirius. It lies along the equator. It can be seen all over the world. It's -1. It's so bright. One, in fact, first magnitude star. It's some 8 light years from us, let's say, round number. And you know what 8 is? 8 is infinity standing up on its hind leg. The light that strikes your eye tonight, if you happen to see Sirius in the sky, left the star 8 years ago, right? That's a measurement of distance, a light year. We see it as it was 8 years ago. The whole sky that we see is a time machine. We're looking backward. And with the telescopes, we can go pretty far backward. I love it when they say that the God of some of the states, I suppose states of consciousness in America, is an awesome God. 13.8, we'll say, light years is the extent of our view to the perimeter. So although it's a little complicated because the universe has been expanding all that, but the light that we see coming 13.7, I think we can get that close maybe now with our telescopes. And with the James Webb telescope, which is delaying for Stuckling around out there trying to get it online. Maybe it should have been out there by now. Maybe be out there by 2022, maybe 2021. We believe it will get so close to the emanation that those of us that follow the Big Bang concept, it's a cyclical theory of the universe coming out, going back in, get so close to the beginning that we'll get a real insight onto what the universe looked like. Admittedly, a much smaller universe. You see, in those days, before it expanded so far, at the earliest moments of visibility, first was sound, something that would have been considered like sound if there had been an ear, but then there was light. Let there be light. Now, the infinity, I say Vedanta comes with, when infinity meets infinity, you open the door and there's Vedanta. Supposing you imagine the edge of the universe, just for fun, metaphorically, and you open the door, infinity ends. And there's Vedanta standing with infinity. Why? Well, try this one on for size if you want some kind of an approximation to a truly mind-bending proposal. The light that left the star or the quasar or whatever it is that we see in the telescope 13.7, let's say, billion years ago. Try this one on for size. See if you can handle it. Traveling 186,000 miles per second. For how long? 10 seconds? 10 days? 13.7 billion years. Give or take a few, factoring in the expansion of the universe. Now there is a concept, if you will, in quotes, a beginning, a hint, an awareness, an attraction to the absolute. And I use all those A's of set purpose alliteration. The absolute with a capital A. So here we go, we're on the road. So we're talking about truthfulness now. And he says we must be true to ourselves first. Well, Shakespeare's line, be first to thyself be true, and then thou canst not be false to any man, was spoken in a certain kind of a satirical setting, in which the father and so on. It perhaps refers satirically to those that think that they, know about their little self, but are fooling themselves. First to thyself be true. It's kind of just a commonplace saying. But it wasn't that way with Socrates. The relation of the Greeks and the Indians is very interesting because we believe that because of the unity of the family of Indo-European languages, that there was an element of the present Indian population and an element of the Greek population that were one years ago, and all of us that speak the Indo-European languages are our mother tongue, and it's probably in Russia, and these Indo-Aryan people, Indo-European people went to, Sanskrit, in Indian, I call them, some flew east and some flew west and some flew over the cuckoo's nest. But Socrates was an illumined soul. I say that because one of our monks at one time came to hear from the University of Indiana studying philosophy, showed me the passages in Plato, where it looks very much as if he was. He would leave the dinner early, the one that's, go on till 1 o'clock at night. And the boys would come out frolicking and arms always singing, whatever. And along the road back home, they would find Socrates, stock still, obviously immersed in the experience of God. Now, Socrates, if you remember, went to his guru, which happened to be at the Apollo temple, the temple of the sun. And the wisdom woman, the oracle of Delphi, which one would hear from inside the cavern of the cave or whatever, probably in an altered state of consciousness. She gave him, if you will, his mantra, the prime idea, the one primary idea to which he was to dedicate his life and think about over and over again. So in Socrates' case, it was deeply sublime. She said, know thyself. Capital S self. So the question is, we must be true to ourselves first, then true to our neighbors. Ha! This gets to be pretty real, pretty concrete. No more abstractions, no more book learning here. I've decided, everybody has a way of doing this and embodying it and personalizing it for himself and herself. I think one's neighbors are like the little one-celled animals that you see in the microscope bumping into each other, don't you see? They're the people we come in contact with. Now, they're kind of like the stars we see at night, maybe 2,000 of them, with maybe 7 septillion stars more out there. in the observable universe. The God of some of our states of mind in this country is an awesome God. So the neighbors are the ones like the stars we see at night that we really bump into, and we have an obligation. And the first obligation is this truthfulness thing. He says we must be true to ourselves first, then true to our neighbors, next to humanity, and finally to God. So we cannot be true to our neighbor. This is where we are today in the country, my friends. This is the U.S. of A. Circa almost November 2020. And on the first day of November, the Southern California Committee for the Pardon of the World's Religions, we're a little offshoot here, little pod. It's going to have a major presentation called Practicing the Presence. To be online, you might pick up somebody in Thailand, somebody in India. And it has to do with one of those steps that we talked about last time, one of the motifs of the grand design, the journey to the infinite, to infinity, which is the things on the relative plane that most of us have to relate to in order to live a strong life, the Dharma, the strength of a point in time and space in which we stand. And we are called upon to stand a certain way. Each person has her in his own Dharma, the way. You know, these big words in India have 40 definitions. The way, the religion of our life. And one thing we're asked to do, I've been convinced by the Protestant minister in our Southern California Committee group, is to work for environmental stability. Because he says anything else is like trying to rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. There's no point talking about humanity's goal in life, their reason for being, which is to see and love God. To love God. And to experience the infinity of light which shows us that we are one with Him. No much point talking about it. There's no humans around anymore. And I have two others, subsets, motifs. One is racial justice, because it means the overcoming of the ego, which causes all of our pain. All of our pain, individually and collectively, is caused by this false thing that we are separate from God. And the third thing is interfaith harmony. These are three modalities, the modus operandi, modus vivendi, method of living, that are some of the apparent, shall I say, requirements or responsibilities as we take this journey from darkness to light, from the apparent world to the reality of our own inner being. So, what's the problem with our neighbor? Say, in terms of racial injustice, which is the theme of this Sunday, I call it George Floyd Sunday, Parliament of Religions, Southern California Committee. The problem, my friends, is not so much, what do they call it? I'm having a trouble with it, but white supremacy. That's not the root. That's what's being focused on right now, and why everybody going into this meeting is expecting to come out different than she and he went into it. Because we're going deep into our hearts and souls, deep into our own existentiality in this whole problem. And you know what we find there? The seed of the whole thing. And it's not supremacy in the first instance. That's the effect of a cause. The cause is superiority. There is the subconscious thing that everyone can examine. As I say, her and his soul. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing shameful about it. You don't need to sidestep it and get it out of the way. You can say, hey, subconsciously, I've been thinking all this time that my culture, my part of the one big human family, hey, we call it Western civilization, what can it be but that, is superior. And my friends, it is not. And the reason it is not is because whoever you are and wherever you come from, if you're born Japanese, thank God. Among other things, you don't have to learn the Japanese language as an adult. Huh? No, those kids over there, they're terribly bright. They're little geniuses running around Japan because by the age of 4, they know how to speak Japanese. Or whatever your family, part of town or the heritage or whatever it is, whether you have one nation or like the Americans, we are the world. 180 languages spoken here at home in L.A. But whoever you are, looking out upon that world, which, outside is fake, and looking on the outside of people's faces, which incidentally, here's a laugher for you, where affinity meets affinity, they can't see. Now, we don't talk about this, but I know your secret. You don't have a face. And you've never seen it. The best you can do is come and see a reverse image like a photograph negative in the mirror. Now, this is the shh. It's okay with me. Don't worry about it. I won't tell a soul. But I know who you are. And the best I know is that you're not that face that's looking out at me that I think is what most of it. So, the man, let's say, this, and I don't care who you start from and what part of the vast human family, which is one, you can't leave out any member of the human family. You have to love them to pieces. Sometimes love them to death, beyond death, where we have the feeling each soul will be facing redemption, redeeming in time. No one will be left out. My grandmother, oh boy, I'll tell you, these people, these early timers, everybody should honor the early timers, like it says. One of the most important 10 Commandments, honor thy father and thy mother. Why? Because we didn't realize it. We realized so late. That woman and that man in the home when I was a little baby boy or girl was God. Huh? Whether they knew it or not, I knew it really was. So that human being over there, 180 degrees separate from you, call him a man for now. Brahman. You're looking at Brahman, the Almighty, the All, in yet another form. So don't you start talking to me, but foolish, intellectual, discriminating faculty, the ego of the firstborn of man. Don't you start talking to me about superiority. Because you ain't got it. You ain't got a monopoly on it. Whatever you bring to the table, you bring whatever. You love Mozart, whatever. Yeah. You have great virtues, great things to bring. But as we're talking about George Floyd, do you have the heart of almost virtually, and here I'm getting a little sloppy, but this is who I am. I can say no other. Virtually every African American, the odds are, will be speaking from the heart. The bus drivers do. You listen to them. They're not talking here. They're talking way up here. They're talking from here. Like Caruso can sing. The voice can start from the heart. Do you even have a tenth, a hundredth, a thousandth, in the case of the preachers, a 10,000th of the love, the holistic awareness at the level of feeling of an African American chosen at random on the streets of the Hollywood Hills, After the Black Lives Matter movement and the people coming up, we had 30,000 people down here at Hollywood and Sunset and, well, Hollywood and Vine and Ivar and Vine. And we had Black Lives Matter signs everywhere on the houses of people in the neighborhood. The greatest sign we saw was placed outside of a beautiful little building, white, with the kind of the Spanish. I think it was a bell up there. It was placed on it could stand up on it. My friends, this is scriptural. This is worship. It's right out of whoever's Bible you read and you love. It said, honor Black lives. That works vice versa. Because everyone has something to bring to the table. Now, you give a man or woman a little education, which was systematically denied in the South. I'm sorry, I come from the South, I have a right to say it. 200 years ago, 40 years before the Civil War, our folks moved across Ohio from Kentucky and whatever, all those states to the freedom of Illinois and Indiana, where Lincoln actually moved to. We knew him over there in Indiana. They systematically denied education. If your recent ancestors came from Africa, all of our ancestors, we all came from Africa, the birthplace, the motherland of the human species. And incidentally, while they were at it, I'm sorry, my brothers and sisters across that line, as soon, I can't get too concrete, but as soon as Lyndon Johnson signed the papers, voting rights, this right, human rights. I could go back again across that Ohio River, the river of oblivion, where the umbilical cord was cut for us when we moved north 40 years before the Civil War. I could go back home. It's a terrible thing to be denied knowledge, even in the case of many African Americans for a long time, or the ability to go home, to even know whatever it was. I could go back home. Because it's still, maybe more than ever, surely more than ever, the land of bhakti, the heart-centered country. And those people, black and white, I think they got the nice qualities from Africa, the speech, the honey speech, and all this stuff. The beautiful heart, the love that is real, the unity of community. I think all those so-called white folks down there, I think they all learned it from the Africans. I hung up the phone the other day, my friends, from somebody called me from Tennessee, where my mother's folks came from, named Joseph Overbay. He claims to me that he lives, Knoxville's a northeastern city to me in Tennessee, 150 miles east of Knoxville. I didn't know there was 150 miles east of Knoxville. You get right up along the Virginia border. He's all elated, inspired by the Eastern mysticism. And after we had a hoo-ha of love and laughter on the phone, I'm looking at a fellow from Brazil here. You know what I'm talking about. Heart country, heart-centered country. As I'm a-putting down the phone, my friends, the receiver, what you call, too late to pick it up again and say, the thought went through my mind, I have just had a blood transfusion. So we have to start looking at each other as Brahman in yet another form. The word Christopher literally means, from the Greek, well, the Roman, the Latin is ferro, ferri, tuli, latus. I carry, to carry, carried, and all that. Translate means to carry across. Pharaoh, see, Cristoforo Colombo, means Christ carrier. So where are we going to carry him? Just outside? Some religions, some denominations in their hands to do good works, be ethical. And And or are we going to carry him inside? Are we going to seek to find him? Seek and ye shall find. My friends, in our hearts. So we're into some kind of big river here, you know, this stuff. So anyway, this truth is to ourselves, our neighbors, meaning you are really Brahman, and what I have to do, if we're really going to get on about this thing of racial justice and all, I'm going to have to come all the way over to where you are, 180 degrees, stand in your shoes, and look at where I was standing, or at me, like in a mirror, reverse image. And I look into your eyes, and from behind your eyes. And unless we get over this ego thing, I don't think we're going to have the unity, maybe, likely, to do the things we have to do for environmental sustainability. See how the web comes together? There are things we must do, including getting up in the morning, if we want to spend a life of meditation and thinking of God with our eyes open as we go through the day with the things we do and the things we feel and the things we see and the things we think. This is pretty big stuff. So he says, and finally to God. Next to man and finally to God. Are we true to ourselves? No. Are we true to our real nature? No. We must be true to ourselves, the Atman, within first. So, truth is the second thing. We must be true to ourselves first. Truth, then, self-control is the first thing. Truth is the second thing. Disinterested love for humanity is another meaning. By disinterested, I'm thinking of God as Brahman. I want to love God and God only because God is and is only the shining infinity. I want to love every leaf on every tree. Every cell that shines when the tree's backlit and you can see them all in the leaf. Unselfish work is the next. Don't you see how these things come along? Karma yoga, bhakti yoga. Why should we remain selfish? These are pretty big questions from this Eastern gentleman. And three wise men came from the East. We got Vivekananda, we got Abhedananda, and three other direct disciples came to this country. What for? That's an easy question. He's asking the echoes. He's asking. We have to ask ourselves, this little self is not much. Sacrifice it, he says, upon the altar of humanity. Think of these words. And be Christ. That is the ideal. Oh, excuse me. You didn't know? Oh, what a delightful surprise. I'm sorry that somehow that wasn't mentioned or somehow made clear to you tonight before you joined the meeting. It should have been somehow pointed out. We Christians here in this room, we people in Vedanta, the ancient wisdom of the East, before Abraham was, I am, Jesus said, we think of ourselves as Christians. That's our secret. Some lady goes banging on the door of the meditation place in Trabuco. Some old woman from a church, you know, what is this church? Banging. Jesus is Lord. Jesus is all. You believe in Jesus? So you can imagine one of those monks coming up from wherever he was, you know, within his, trying to get within the infinity in his soul, and saying, yes, ma'am? You a Christian? You believe in Jesus? May I ask you a question? Well, all right, go ahead. You got a preacher? Of course we do. Has he seen Jesus? What are you talking about? Well, let me ask you another question, if you don't mind. And I don't want to be impolite, but you got a father still living? Well, no, he went on to glory years ago. But you had a father that you lived and brought you up? Oh, of course I did. May I ask you, ma'am, has he seen Jesus? What about your grandfather? Great-grandfather? Perhaps, my dear, you would like to know, while I go back, if you're kind permission,